Catus Maximus here again, this time with a review and comparison of stubby and small screwdrivers. I made a distinction between these, in particular the small ones, and items such as these precision screwdrivers, mainly due to the way precision screwdrivers have a spinning handle on the back of them, or the more traditional metal ones like this. All of these here are what would be considered traditional screwdrivers, acetate handles with a blade inserted into them. Even these tiny ones, like this tiny little Edison, it's just a really small. This is like a eyeglasses screwdriver, but nonetheless it's just a tiny screwdriver with a little acetate handle. And as you can see, we have a huge variety of brands here, including some more rare ones like from Coast to Coast and BlackHawk, as well as others like Husky, the older Husky USA ones, a variety of Stanleys and Craftsmans, even some power belts in there. And just on a quick update, when I did my precision screwdriver review and comparison, I just didn't dig up some of these last of the precision screwdrivers that I had, so I'll talk about those real fast. They do make precision screwdrivers such as this this General, which actually have interchangeable tips. Those were some of the best I ever seen as far as the little metal handled ones. This is a Husky. That's actually an interchangeable tip precision screwdriver, and I thought that was neat. And then the last thing I wanted to add to my older precision screwdriver reviews, I had these, and so they aren't always short like these GC Electronics ones here. You can get really long handle precision screwdrivers. So I did want to just point that out, and sometimes these really long ones have come quite in handy. But speaking of really long screwdrivers, this is a pretty darn long precision screwdriver. It's about 12 inches or a foot long. But then we have this Rosco VL210, and I assume the VL actually stands for very long. This is a truly long precision little screwdriver. It's the same tip size as this GC, but we can see that we have just a huge amount of extension. A little screwdriver that's super long like this is just great for automotive work. If you're trying to remove little fuel injector clips and all that kind of stuff, a real long flathead screwdriver can come in real and handy, as well as working with O-rings. So I try to keep, you just want to be careful. They're obviously pretty easy to bend, but they can be immensely handy, and you just remember that that's the nature of the tool or the nature of that type of tool. And another neat thing about screwdrivers is you get exposed to a variety of different brands. This is a pretty nice one, and I actually noticed it was barely visible that it's a J&H, made in USA, and I was pretty surprised. So you always, if you're looking at used tools, want to take a close look if they look decent. We do have a Cobalt, and this is a newer one, and I think the Cobalts are fine. Maybe not, they're not as good as the old Husky USA. I don't know about how they are compared to the newer Huskies. But the older, actually this is one of the non-Husky USA units. But we can see that the Husky uses a square shank, and then they have ridges that they forge into the screwdriver tip. So in this situation, the Huskies are better than the Cobalts. We have long ones and short ones, obviously, or not obviously, but as it turns out, I end up with more flatheads in stubby and small than Phillips. And I believe a big part of that is that the Phillips just end up getting so torn up. I've seen a lot of used little Phillips screwdrivers, such as this little power belt here, and the tips always just get inevitably blown out, where on slot heads they tend to hold up a little better. We have some other little slot heads here, like this little Challenger. There we go. And it's always kind of neat to find an old little tool like this, especially when you know it's high quality. And I like these little screwdrivers with the acetate handles because you get a real nice grip and you have a lot of turning force. That's what's always been a little more frustrating with precision screwdrivers, is they're made for real light duty screws, watch repair and eyeglasses. But you just don't get a lot of grip. Even with nice knurling on these, it's not the same as having a coarse acetate handle. This is a tiny little screwdriver, but nonetheless you have a nice coarse gripping handle, and it just makes them easier to use. And once again, we have this little tiny Edison here, and this thing is really pretty darn small, and I think it came with an eyeglasses kit, but it's just neat to see a regular screwdriver just shrunken down so small. I will eventually do a review of this Husky USA set that I picked up, and it seemed that it may have had a variety of both USA and non-US made, such as this one was made in USA, but this other little one wasn't. But that set was pretty nice because it came with a huge variety of screwdrivers, and I'll end up doing a review of that at some point. Then we have some Phillips here, and these would be number 0 Phillips, and we have, you know, some Craftsman's here, and we have, there we go, Craftsman and Husky USA. I believe whoever is producing Husky and Craftsman was the same factory. We can see that the screwdrivers are essentially identical to each other, just different coloring on them. Even the same type of shank and tips. And the same goes for these tiny ones. These Craftsman, I wonder if this is a USA one. No, this is a non-USA. And so this is essentially just a copy of the Husky. So whoever made them was indeed the same factory, so you can know that the Huskies and the Craftsmans were basically the same tool. We have kind of an oddball here. This thing is known as a Pick Quick, I believe, and this is a small interchangeable tip Stubby. It's kind of a precision screwdriver, but it doesn't have a spinning back, so it's really just a stubby interchangeable tip screwdriver. And this one comes with a few different Torx sizes or Torx, plus a little slot head and a couple of Phillips and a couple of different slot heads. And so this thing's always been kind of handy when you just need to use some kind of small fastener or work with a small fastener, but you don't want to grab a whole pile of precision screwdrivers to try to figure out what size you need. So it's kind of neat that they make two little tools like that. This big handle screwdriver I did include in the review because it's a little bit odd. It has a very stubby slot head tip with just a large full-size handle. So it's one of those oddball in-between screwdrivers. It has a huge handle with a very small tip. This thing has actually been surprisingly handy in a few situations because you have just an immense amount of control over that blade. You just have this huge handle and then a extremely short, this completely rigid blade. And it's really easy to keep it well on the fastener, get a lot of force with your hand, and just have a lot of control. So that's why I included it, because they even make some oddball ones like this. When it comes to the larger size, or to the Phillips of the more standard stubby screwdrivers, I've certainly run into a whole lot more slot heads used, and I have Phillips, and what we have here is we have a Husky USA, we have an old Stanley, which I believe is a BlackHawk. Stanley owns BlackHawk, and I believe BlackHawk made these because this is the 100 plus. These were actually a better quality Stanley here. And then of course we have a power belt to compare, and the power belt does use a chrome vanadium tips. They do hold up pretty well, and there's just a little comparison of those. And the reason I had mentioned the Stanley is made by the BlackHawk was, here's an old BlackHawk, and it's a real small stubby screwdriver, but we can see here that they're, you know, essentially the very same screwdriver. So it's always neat to kind of run into a couple different brands and say, oh, they really are the same. There are a couple unknowns like both of these, which is kind of odd because both of these seem pretty nice, but I've really looked at them closely and they just don't have any branding. So they don't always properly brand tools, as we've learned in previous videos. And in comparing Cobalt versus Husky USA here, and we'll even choose, this is actually a Stanley, but this is a real cheap basic version of a Stanley, and we can see that they include texturing, but you know, the stamping on the side isn't that great, but it's fine. These are forged. What we do notice is that the Cobalt actually looks distinctly cheaper. It kind of has that cheaper finish. We can see that it has, if we can get this to focus, there's some really kind of odd grinding, no stippling, no kind of traction aid for the slot tip. And this, on slot head screws, these ridges actually help quite a bit, because when you're turning, they actually bite into the flat wall and work. It actually, the slot heads, that actually works. And so we can see that the Cobalt is just a bit cheaper. It looks a little bit cheaper. The acetate just doesn't have quite the feel and I guess what you call it, the eyeball effect. of being as high a quality. So as I'm starting to see this here, I found these cobalts just randomly in garage sales, and now that I've really taken a closer look at them, I believe that they just aren't as good as the Home Depot Huskies. To finish off on these stubbies, we'll look at some of the auto brands. We did just look at this little BlackHawk, which I like because it's just so tiny. But we have a few of the more rare brands out there, and we can see that there really is quite the variety. Now, the two Craftsmans were made by the same factory, and what was surprising is this orange one was a Craftsman, and I actually kind of liked that. I wish they would have made whole sets of, and they probably did, just I never seen them, or it was before I was into tools. These bright orange handled screwdrivers I thought was a good idea because they're really easy to see and find if you drop them. What I also thought was interesting is even though both these Craftsmans were made out of the same factory and they're actually both forged USA versions, if we can see there, they're actually distinctly different. We can see that this one, they both use square stock, but this one seems like it was a little bit cheaper. You can see there isn't any stippling. It's still a pretty nice screwdriver, but this orange handled one, you can see where they did put stippling on it, and interestingly enough, they started flattening out the screwdriver right along the corner of the square stock, where they were just right along the flat edge on this slightly cheaper one. We have a Stanley Handyman, which was cheaper than that, or excuse me, a little bit better than that other one that I just showed you, which was the real cheap Stanley. We have a relatively rare Coast to Coast. It's one of the only Coast to Coast tools I think I've ever seen. Although I do remember that hardware store when I was young. They haven't been around for a while, and they did, their little screwdriver was pretty decent. No kind of texturing, but they did put a little coating or an extra heat treatment on the tip. And then, of course, right here we have a XceLite, which is a pretty decent brand. But, when you look at compared to other screwdrivers, they're just kind of more basic, where they just took and rolled the end of the tip and then, put a little bit of heat treatment on it. But they didn't, go through the extra effort of making texturing. And I think that is a bit newer. So older screwdrivers like this just may not have been available. That type of system just may not have been available. I can say that the tip on this XceLite, I've used it quite a bit, really has held up well. And to go ahead and finish off this review, we'll talk about the stubbiest of all stubby screwdrivers, and that is these little thumb spinners. So how these work is that you would somehow break the screw. It's nearly impossible to break a screw on one of these, although I did read a comment from a viewer recently that most of these have enough of a little bit of a hex sticking out, say like on this slot head, where you can get a little 1/4-inch wrench or a little 1/4-inch ratcheting box wrench on that and then use it to boost your leverage. These are designed where they have a little cup in the back. This one's actually not very deep. We'll show on this one. These are a bit deeper, but they have a little cup, and so that's how you hold them, is a little cup. Helps you keep it balanced, and then you just use your fingers to rotate the screwdriver. These are awkward to use, but they can be invaluable. When you get their screw broken, these things will actually allow you to spin it out in a reasonable amount of time and just an absolutely microscopic amount of space. Sorry for that little change. I had to get something to compare to. I had also another comment from somebody kind of wanting a comparison advantages and disadvantages of things such as right angle drivers versus stubby drivers, or just using 1/4-inch, the little ratchets, the 1/4-inch hex ratchets that use these little bits. And the real big deal is that this right angle, and this is actually a Husky USA that I just dug up that I forgot to include in that previous video. But the deal is that these are a whole lot shorter. They're just the right angle screwdriver. The biggest deal about them is this angle right here is about 1 inch tall in total. And even these micro stubbies or a ratchet, the only way you can achieve the same thing is to use a box wrench around the shank of just a standard 1 inch long short driver bit. And that's a whole lot more awkward than having a right angle screwdriver. Although it is true these things can be difficult to use, especially if you're trying to run out a screw. But I've tended to use them more for trying to break a screw where I need a lot of leverage, and then usually there's enough space. Rarely are you in a situation where you're trying to get a screw out of a space that's only, you know, that wide. And the comparison with these I'll just show real fast is they actually make a variety of these, and I didn't realize it, but what we have here is we have black carbon finish ones. I always kind of liked the way those looked. Where's the other one? Here's the slot head. So we had a number 2 Phillips and a 1/4 inch slot head, which I kind of like the black carbon Phillips. And then we have a number 2 Phillips, and we have a number 1 Phillips in standard finish, and of course a 1/4 inch and a 3/16 slot head. So even in these little stubby drivers, you can get a 6-piece set, and they'll all be a bit different from each other. Anyway, that's the end of this review and comparison of stubby and small screwdrivers, and just wanted to put that out there and show the variety of them that have been made, and to also show that if you're like me and sometimes when you're working with small screws, all you have access to is these precision screwdrivers, which can be difficult under more tighter screws when you just want like a normal screwdriver that doesn't have a little spinning handle, that you certainly can get a variety of screwdrivers that are just standard acetate screwdrivers that are, of course, very small or very short. Anyway, I really appreciate everybody watching and subscribing, and if you haven't subscribed, please do. Caddis Maximus out.